name is Olivia, and this is the first installment in the 50 States Haunted House series. I figured I would start off with a quick explanation about what you are watching right now, and I'll also tell you a bit about me and this series. So, to start, what you are watching on the screen right now is a form of embroidery called cross-stitch. Cross-stitch is essentially pixel art, which I like a lot because my brain seems to be able to process art square by square rather than other forms of art like drawing or painting. I like to work my cross-stitch row by row, starting at the top and moving down. I also like to work one color at a time. There are a lot of different ways to do cross-stitch though. Some folks like to work from the center, some like to work multiple colors at a time, and some like to work in a way that ensures the back of their work remains as neat as the front. I'm not tidy enough for that, but I have respect for the people who are. While I have always been pretty crafty, I got into cross-stitching around 2020, right around the same time everyone in the world was trying new hobbies to stop us from going stir-crazy. Prior to cross-stitch, I mostly knit. I started when I was young after watching both of my older sisters knit and thinking it was cool. The first project I attempted was, of course, a scarf, and it was not good. It started normally, but it quickly just got wider and wider. So I was a little discouraged and I put my knitting needles down for a while until sometime in high school. I picked knitting back up as a way to cope with stress and I just kind of kept it up from there. Knitting was my main fiber art until the pandemic when I picked up cross-stitch and I kind of fell head over heels with it. I've since also moved on to do some embroidery and also crochet. A few years back I started an Instagram and thus Sit by the Fiber was born. I've also always been a fan of the paranormal, and in fact, I'm fairly certain the house I grew up in is haunted, but that's a story for another time. Anyway, I've always been a fan of cheesy ghost shows, alien encounter stories, and the spooky stories about cryptids. As a result, the goal of my Instagram page was to kind of mesh those two parts of my life and make fun and spooky stuff, and also tell the story that inspired the pieces. Alright, enough about me. Let's talk about the projects that you're going to see on this channel. Basically, every month I plan on doing a long-form video on a topic ranging from alien encounters to haunted buildings to cryptids, and the list goes on. But to fill the time in between, I thought it would be fun to do a bi-weekly series, and I chose haunted houses in every state because I have a real soft spot in my heart for ghost stories. However, to go along with just telling the stories, I also wanted to incorporate my art into it. So for each haunted house in the 50 states, I'm also going to be making a cross-stitch miniature of that building. The method I have used for selecting the states is just to use a random 50 state selector and scour the internet for haunted houses in that state. If I see one that continues to pop up and it has an interesting architectural design that I think will render well as a cross-stitched mini, then that's usually the building that I select and I start doing research. My other goal is to try to avoid the heavy hitters of the haunted house world. For instance, the first state that was selected from the generator was Kentucky. Kentucky has a couple of really widely known haunted locations, most namely of which is Waverly Hills Sanatorium. I didn't select that building to cover despite its unique architecture because that building has so much of a story to tell that it deserves its own long-form episode. Similarly, when I cover Kansas, I won't be looking at the Sally House, and when I cover Rhode Island, I won't cover the Conjuring House, because I think those places have enough history and stories surrounding them that it would be a waste to try to contain them in just a 10-minute video. With all that being said, let's speed this cross-stitch up and move on to this week's haunted location in Kentucky. For Kentucky, I chose the Old Talbott Tavern, which is a restaurant/bed and breakfast located in Bardstown, Kentucky. It was originally built in 1779, and it is one of the oldest buildings found in Kentucky. The tavern was originally built to serve as a stagecoach stop, and later became the western end of the Stagecoach Road between Philadelphia and Virginia in the second half of the 18th century. This means that it saw a lot of traffic. It was originally known as the Heinz Hotel, but after several name changes throughout its life, it became best known as the Old Talbott Tavern in 1885. Throughout its history, the tavern has been visited by many famous faces, including composer Stephen Collins Foster, inventor of the steamboat John Fitch, and several presidents including William Henry Harrison, notorious dirtbag Andrew Jackson, and a young Abraham Lincoln. According to local legend, the tavern was visited by royalty, including exiled French King Louis Philippe, whose entourage painted several murals in the building during their visit in 1797, which were later uncovered. It was also said to have been visited by the Queen of Romania in 1926. Local tales also mention the use of the tavern as a base for General George Rogers Clark during the Revolutionary War. The original building was 2 stories tall, featuring 2 front entrances and stone walls that were 2 feet thick. Since its establishment, a building has been added to the south of the original structure, as well as another building to the west that was made in a similar style and connected by verandas to the original property. If you take a look at pictures of the tavern, I think it's really neat that you can see where the history of the building started and how it has grown with the times. While the additions were built in a similar style, you can still see the differences, and that was part of what made me want to choose this particular building for the series. Anyway, back to the cool architecture. Along with the stone walls, the tavern has features reminiscent of the inns in Warwickshire, England, such as exposed ceiling beams and deep window casings. The original structure also featured 2 fireplaces for cooking, which can actually still be seen in the restaurant area of the building today. The Old Talbott Tavern was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1973. In March of 1998, the building suffered an electrical fire that mostly affected the upper floor of the establishment. Though it was reopened in November of 1999, the murals painted by King Louis Philippe's entourage were damaged in the fire and have yet to be restored to their original glory as far as my research could tell. But now that we have covered the history and architectural influence of the building, let's move on to the fun spooky history of this establishment. The most famous ghost in the tavern is Jesse James. He was the leader of the James Younger gang and was most notable for robbing banks and trains. It is said that he visited the tavern and drunkenly aimed and shot at the birds in the murals on the walls, leaving holes in the wall that can still be seen today. Though unclear on why Jesse James would be haunting this location, he was supposedly seen by 2 employees one evening as they were closing up. They spotted a man upstairs and went up to investigate because they were supposed to be the only 2 people in the building. After following him out of the fire escape door, he turned towards the 2 pursuers, let out a hideous laugh, and faded before their eyes. No thanks. That would be my last day working at that establishment if that ever happened to me. 3 weeks later, while watching a TV program, one of the employees saw Jesse James pop up on screen and explained, "That's it? That's the man that she had seen disappear in front of her eyes just weeks prior." There's also said to be a lady in white that is described as being thin with long brown hair and wearing a long 1800s-style white dress. One guest told of waking up to her floating over their bed and staring at them before floating out the window. I just could not imagine. I think I would have hightailed it out of there. I kind of wonder if this guest did, because I don't think that there's any way I could have stayed in that room after seeing something like that. Other paranormal experiences in the tavern include objects moving on their own, doors opening and closing on their own, knocking on doors when no one is around, disembodied voices, a piano playing on its own, as well as my least favorite, which is shadow figures being seen lurking in the corners. Now, if you're interested in visiting the Old Talbott Tavern to catch a glimpse of some of these spooky legends, it is open for folks to visit. So stop by and grab a table, but make sure to leave an extra chair in case you have an unexpected guest join you for a bite. And that's this week's peek at the Old Talbott Tavern. All resources for the history behind this establishment come from the Old Talbott Tavern website, as well as from the National Register of Historic Places database. If you have any fun and spooky experiences with this bed and breakfast, feel free to leave them down below. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to the page. Check the description for links to my socials, and I'll see you next time. Bye!